This is a creepy panda production. Ancient Anomalies. It was a stifling summer day when my fascination with the unexplained propelled me to hop in my car and drive towards the decrepitude of Old Town in Riga. The cobblestone roads seemed to whisper ancient secrets as tires rolled over them, each one embedded with countless tales of eras past. Eager to delve into the heart of Latvia's storied history, I had resolved to investigate the folklore of the space beneath the city, the legendary catacombs rumored to be teeming with anomalies beyond the grasp of modern science. The information I'd gathered painted the catacombs as a labyrinth of the unknown, undisturbed for centuries, except for the few daring souls who ventured beneath and resurfaced with tales of shadowy figures and inexplicable lights. The entrance I sought was tucked away behind the old St. James's Cathedral, forgotten by most, save for those drawn to the darker corners of the past. Slipping through the iron gate, which groaned in protest, I was enveloped by an immediate drop in temperature, my breath visible in the dim torchlight I brought. Deeper into the catacombs, the silence was a physical presence, the darkness thick enough to smother. Then there it was, a faint echo of whispers. I paused, straining to listen. The whispers grew clearer, adopting the cadence of a language I couldn't comprehend. The sound seemed to dance around the walls, leading me, luring me further down corridors etched with strange symbols that made my vision blur when I looked too closely. Turning a corner, I entered a chamber that housed a statue so lifelike it sent a chill down my spine. Its eyes, carved from an obsidian-like stone, appeared to follow me. Here, the whispers crescendoed into a symphony of voices. A fixation to understand the story behind these anomalies gripped me, drowning out the screaming part of my brain urging me to flee. With trembling hands, I reached out to the statue. The instant I made contact, the world shifted. I wasn't in the catacombs anymore, but standing in the heart of Old Town. Only this wasn't the city I knew. Buildings loomed, crafted in a style from centuries past. The air was filled with the clangor of market life, and people were dressed in garb from another age. Baffled, I tried to process the cacophony of medieval vibrancy around me. My daze was shattered by a piercing scream. I spun to see a figure in dark robes, pointing at me and shouting words that set the crowd ablaze with fear and anger. They surged towards me, and I ran, driven by a primal surge of fear. Their shouts chased me as I darted through streets that should have been familiar, but now felt like a twisting maze designed to trap me in this nightmare. Exhausted and disoriented, I collapsed beside what seemed to be a merchant's stall, its owner staring at me with wide eyes. Before I could speak, the world spun again, and I was back in the catacombs, alone and gasping for breath. The statue, no longer an innocuous bystander, held an air of malevolence. I didn't hesitate, I fled, propelling myself toward the faint light of the entrance. Emerging into the world of the living, the modern cityscape of Riga felt like a salvation. The sun's warmth was a stark contrast to the chill I could still feel seeping from my bones. I couldn't explain what happened, whether it was a trick of the mind or some rift in time opened by the catacombs' ancient anomalies. One thing was clear, I had been spared. As I write this account, the distant whispers from below the city still haunt me, their indistinct murmurs a reminder of the thin veil between the known and the unknowable. My curiosity remains, but it's tempered now by a newfound respect for those secrets that time has chosen to keep hidden from the daylight world above. The catacombs of Old Town hold their mysteries tight, and some thresholds, I've learned, are better left uncrossed. Displaced Dimensions. It all started when my buddy Mike found that antique compass at a garage sale in Sleepy Hollow. "Dude, check this out," he shouted from across the musty lawn, crammed with old furniture and forgotten toys. He held the weathered brass object like it was the Holy Grail, its glass cracked but the needle spinning wildly. Little did I know, that piece of junk was going to be the gateway to the most terrifying experience of my life. We took it back to my place, a small apartment in Terrytown, a stone's throw from the Hudson River. "It's got to be broken," I said, watching the needle continue its erratic dance. "Or maybe it's matching to some freak magnetic field," Mike suggested, half joking. That night, after pizza and some beers, we passed out on the couch, the compass forgotten on the coffee table. The next morning, the world felt off. I woke up to a yellow-tinted sky and a silence that hung heavy. Mike was already at the window, staring outside with a dumbfounded expression. "Dude, come see this," he murmured. Stepping up beside him, I was greeted by a sight that churned my stomach. Our familiar neighborhood was twisted, buildings stretched towards the sky like taffy, and the roads spiraled into impossible geometries. "We're still dreaming, right?" I whispered, feeling a cold dread creep up my spine. But the chill in the air and the sharp tang of iron told me otherwise. "It's that compass, I swear," Mike said, his voice shaking. Oddly, the compass now pointed steadily in one direction. Against my better judgment, we decided to follow it. We left the apartment cautiously, our every step feeling like a plunge into an abyss of uncertainty. We walked for what felt like hours. The scenery morphed around us, alleyways twisted into tunnels, familiar sights refracted into disturbing variations. It was when we crossed the once bustling main street, now overgrown with grotesque plants, that we first saw them. Shadowy figures, with limbs too long, eyes too bright, moving jerkily like puppets on strings. They noticed us and let out a shiver-inducing hiss. Heart-pounding, we ran. We darted through a forest that had sprouted where Central Avenue used to be, branches clawing at our faces, roots trying to entrap our feet. "We need to get back," I gasped, out of breath and close to panic. Mike nodded, gripping the compass so tight his knuckles turned white. Finally, we stumbled upon a clearing with a single structure that defied the chaos, an unassuming stone well that hadn't been there before. The compass pointed directly down into its dark depths, desperation clawing at our throats. We looked at each other, and without a word, we knew what we had to do. We climbed down the well, the damp stone cold beneath our fingers. Down there in that suffocating darkness, we found it, a portal, shimmering like oil on water. It felt alive, humming with energy, beckoning us to step through. So we did. We emerged in the echo of our own world, our Terrytown, but silent, abandoned, a ghost town. The compass was still now, as if its job was done. Mike and I were too shaken to speak, each trying to process the nightmare we journeyed through. But something was still wrong. The air was stale, and the silence was total. No birds, no distant traffic. We moved instinctively towards my apartment, hoping for some semblance of normalcy. The apartment was just as we left it, but covered with a fine layer of dust, as if it had been years rather than hours. We sat on the couch, the absurdity of the situation making us laugh. Short, hysterical barks that sounded like sobs. Then there was a knock at the door. A cold sweat broke out on my back. Slowly, cautiously, we approached. When the door swung open, nobody was there, just a note on the ground. With trembling hands, I picked it up and read aloud, "To reclaim your place, the compass must break." We didn't hesitate. We smashed that damn thing against the floor until it was nothing but shards of metal and glass. The world heaved a sigh, and the color seeped back into reality. We ran to the window, and everything was as it should be. Cars on the road, people on the sidewalks, and the sweet sound of life. It's been a while since that day. We don't talk about it much, but the fear hasn't left us. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, I wonder about those displaced dimensions and the compass that served as a key. But mostly, I just try to live a normal life, always a little afraid that one morning I'll wake up to a skewed sky yet again. Eerie Echoes. It was on a whim that I decided to visit the rural town of Stull in Kansas, a place many regard with a mix of fear and curiosity due to the legends surrounding it. The old and now ruins of Stull Church had always been a topic of eerie local folklore, with stories of it being a gateway to hell, or the place where the devil himself would walk the earth. I was never one to believe in supernatural tales, but something about Stull called to me, or rather, it was the promise of silence and desolation that I craved after my hectic city life. Arriving as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a fiery array of oranges and purples, I was struck by how the ruins seemed to absorb the last light, standing as a dark silhouette against the twilight. I parked my car at a distance, deciding to approach on foot. The air seemed to grow colder with every step I took towards the church, and an uncomfortable feeling settled in my gut, a whispering intuition that I wasn't alone. I shook off the feeling, blaming it on the stories I had read. The closer I got, the more I felt the silence of the town weigh down on me. It was an unnatural stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. This was no longer the peaceful quiet I yearned for. It was a silence that screamed. Every crunch of gravel under my shoes seemed amplified, and I found myself stopping frequently to glance over my shoulder. That's when I first heard it, the faintest whisper brushing past my ear like the wings of a moth. I spun around, my heart racing, but saw nothing but the wind-worn headstones that lay scattered around the church grounds. Trying to convince myself it was my imagination, I entered what remained of the church. The interior was bathed in the blue light of the rising moon, casting shadows that danced along the walls. I could see the sky through where a roof once provided shelter for the praying. Vulnerability crept up on me. I was exposed and alone in the hollowed husk of this once sacred place. Then another whisper, closer this time, a distinct echo in the stillness. I couldn't make out words, but there was a plea to it, a desperate call that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried to move, to leave, but my feet betrayed me, rooted to the spot. Panic set in as the whispers grew in number. They were all around me now, a cacophony of hushed voices clawing at the edges of my sanity. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I struggled against the invisible force that bound me to the ground. It felt like the church itself wanted me there, holding me as a captive audience to its ancient secrets. Cries and murmurs blended together until suddenly they stopped. Silence slammed back down, so heavy it was suffocating. And then I realized the voices hadn't stopped. They were just giving space for something else to make its presence known. From the shadowed corners of the ruins I saw them, figures, barely more human in shape, emerging from the darkness. Their eyes were hollow, their movements jerky and unnatural as they began to circle around me. I could see through them to the crumbling walls behind, their forms mist-like and yet somehow dense and suffocating. They reached out to me with hands that were little more than mottled gray veils, and I felt an icy chill as one brushed against my arm. They were the lost souls of Stull, trapped in their unholy sanctuary, and they were not alone. One figure stood apart from the rest, taller and far more menacing. It advanced slowly, making the air itself feel heavy and thick. I could sense this was no mere echo of a past life. This was something that never had a life to begin with. In its presence, the despair and hopelessness of the other echoes were magnified, turning from whispers into agonizing screams inside my head. Just when I thought I would collapse under the weight of their torment, an otherworldly growl resonated through the ruins, emanating from the entity that loomed before me. In that moment, all my skepticism, all my disbelief in tales of the supernatural shattered. This was real, terrifyingly so. The growl was a command, a demand for something I didn't understand. Was it my soul, my sanity? The shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around the entity, and I felt it reach into my very being. It was searching, probing, deciding my fate. And as if in response to my deepest fears, my own voice, detached from me, began spilling confessions and secrets I've never uttered aloud. I was confessing to the darkness. It was then that I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as though something was being ripped from inside me. The entity had found what it was looking for, and with a triumphant howl that shook the remnants of the church, it withdrew. The echoes of the lost souls suddenly vanished, like smoke in a strong wind, and I was left alone in the silence once again. But it was different now. The air lighter, the oppressive weight gone. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, clenching at the grass, as if to assure myself that I was still here, still alive. I didn't stick around to see the dawn. With the little strength I had left, I stumbled back to my car and drove away from Stull as fast as I could, leaving behind the ghostly wails and the ruins. They were no longer just bricks and memories. They were a living, breathing embodiment of horror. The experience stayed with me, haunting my nights, echoing through my days. It became a part of me, a reminder that some places are best left alone, their stories untold, their whispers ignored. Because sometimes the echoes are not just echoes, they are warnings. Flickering Phenomena. November had cast a somber spell over old Edinburgh, with waning sunlight and shadows creeping around its ancient stone. My cousin had dragged me into this city of stories, this place where myths seemed to seep from the very walls. Lawn Market bustled behind us as we walked with youthful defiance into the mouth of Mary King's Close. The Close, with its subterranean passages and centuries-old lore, was a labyrinth of the past. They said it was haunted, that the dead mingled with the living here, their whispers almost audible in the dark. I never believed in ghosts. That was until we joined one of those haunted tours, a supposed encounter with the flickering phenomena of the long deceased. Our guide, a character donning a tricorn hat and carrying a dim lantern, led us deeper underground. His stories took on life beneath the surface, speaking of plague victims, their spirits lingering, and a little girl named Annie. Our small group huddled closer as the chill of the unseen nipped at our bones. Then in a vaulted room, it happened. A candlestick on a rotten table flickered, extinguished, and relit itself. Panic was swift, a contagious fire, but I stood frozen. The darkness seemed heavy, the air thick with silent watchers. Without thinking, I reached out for the candlestick and pulled my hand back as it became blistering hot to the touch. "It's a trick," I heard myself say, but the guide was mortally pale. "This isn't part of the act," he whispered. We tried to leave, the lot of us scrambling over each other, but the narrow passage felt endless. In the pitch black, every step was an act of faith until, impossibly, we emerged into the Edinburgh night. The living city felt alien, its modern lights harsh against the experience we couldn't shake off. We'd touched something ancient, something that was eagerly reaching back. My cousin couldn't look me in the eye. We didn't speak of the clothes again, and soon I found myself on a train back home, alone with my racing thoughts. As the countryside blurred past, a strange notion took hold. I needed to go back. The flickering phenomena wasn't just an unresolved mystery. It was a call. Days turned into weeks, yet sleep eluded me. Shadows in my room danced with an eerie familiarity, candlelight where there was none. Resolutely, I packed a small bag and booked a train ticket back to Edinburgh. Lawn Market, once a riot of colors and sounds, now seemed like a sepulchral gateway. I returned to Mary King's Close alone. The guide recognized me and didn't object as I slipped into the shadows of the descending group. As we reached the room with the vaulted ceiling, I hung back. The candlestick was, as I remembered, mocking me with its solid, cold metal. The tour moved on and left me there, in the palpable stillness. The strike of a match broke the silence, my hands trembling as the flame took life. Soon the room was alive with flickering shadows, like an audience of the past. I uttered a simple question into the void. Why me? The answer was a sudden drop in temperature, a whisper of air against my cheek, and then the oppressive sensation of not being alone. Figures took shape in the corners of my eyes, shifting, insubstantial, fleeting. I was scared, yet something primal within me refused to flee. Then there she was, the little girl named Annie, watching me with hollow eyes. "There's something behind the walls," she said. "Help us." Efforts to communicate with Annie led me to a concealed section of the close, hidden behind rotten timber. My fingers brushed against old stone, and I felt the erratic pulse of the flickering phenomena stronger than ever. Then, a gap. Braving the unknown, I squeezed through, the walls pressing against my body. The hidden chamber was a pocket in time, untouched and sealed away. Before me was a sight that chilled my blood. A gathering of objects in a circle, in the center, a book. Its pages left open, whispering of rituals and unnerving stares from the tree line across the room. I realized the phenomena were tied to this. I took the book, a quiet promise to Annie filling the space between my ribs. The air seemed cleaner on my way out, almost grateful. As I emerged, a glint of light announced the lifting of a long night, a dawn Edinburgh hadn't seen in ages. The innocent could rest now, reassured by the flicker of a steady flame. Now as I sit in the familiar surroundings of my home, the book rests on my desk, a connection to a past that ripped through the fabric of reality. Annie's whispers are a fading memory, but I know the flickering phenomena were a beacon, a cry for help stretching across centuries. And maybe, just maybe, I was the right person in the right place to answer it. Shadowed frequencies. Listening to late-night radio was my guilty pleasure, a secret shared between the static whispers and me. Shadowed Frequencies, a segment shrouded in urban myths, always aired at the witching hour, where dedicated enthusiasts like myself hungered for the thrills of the unknown. One night, as the crests of the Pacific waves crashed in a rhythmic percussion on Oregon's rocky coastline near my small home in Cannon Beach. Something peculiar crept through my speakers. The show's host, Midnight Mark, posed a challenge that night. Buried within the static, he claimed, were coordinates to a place beyond the maps, where reality was frayed at the edges. Curiosity gnawed at me, urging me toward obsession. I scavenged every piece of antique radio equipment I could find throughout Astoria's thrift shops. Each device was an additional ear to the ground, listening for the secret that Midnight Mark taunted his listeners with. Then one night, it happened. A clear sequence of numbers hissed out during the show. Scribbling them down, sweat beading on my brow, I couldn't believe it. They led to an old fire watchtower deep within the Tillamook State Forest, a relic from a simpler time, now wrapped in the whispers of pines and unforgiving weather. The drive was long, the roads familiar yet unsettling in pre-dawn darkness. My headlights cut through the mist as I approached the forest, the colossal trees standing as silent sentinels. Fueled by a mix of adrenaline and coffee, I felt every mile of wilderness edge its way under my skin. Finding the tower was like discovering a tomb. The stairs groaned in protest under my weight, each step an echo that vanished into the fog. At the top, I expected a revelation, but I found a dusty room with a lone, crackling radio, a twin to the ones at my home. As the sun began its ascent, a shadow passed overhead. The sensation was immediate and chilling, an oppressive weight that stifled the dawn chorus and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand alert. I switched on the radio, finding comfort in the familiar jingle of the upcoming episode of Shadowed Frequencies. To my horror, Midnight Mark's voice, usually brimming with warmth and mystery, was laced with panic. He spoke in codes hidden beneath a discourse about folklore, but the message was for me. Do not trust the eyes that follow from the forest. They are the listeners, jealously guarding their secrets. I felt them before I saw them, eyes peeking from the trees, glinting with malice and ancient knowledge. Fear rooted me to the spot as figures began to emerge, ragged and shifting, as if stitched together from shadows and the dark underbelly of the woods. They moved in a twisted waltz circling the tower, and a deep guttural chant crescendoed with their steps. I tallied their numbers, 12, each with voices that seemed to stitch the air back together as they chanted. As dawn broke, they vanished as if swallowed by daylight. Heart racing, I descended the tower, the forest now bursting alive with morning. Behind me, the tower stood, a monolith of history's best left untold, radio still crackling with the remnants of night's folly. I never tuned into Shadowed Frequencies again, nor did I dare try to reach Midnight Mark. But as I settled back into normality, the late-night static that once was my solace became a reminder. Some frequencies are better left unexplored, shadows that whisper secrets not meant for human ears.